One of the things that I have learned in my adult life is that national wealth is created by industry and commerce. It is not created by the government. The government does not create jobs. And secondly, excessive government, taxing, spending, and regulating is toxic to industry in America, the engine that builds our wealth. And I can see from the looks of our audience that a lot of you are about as old as me, and many of you probably remember our country in 1960. Let me take you back 49 years. The United States of America had the 10 largest banks in the world. We had the 3 largest auto companies in the world. You could take any single, I could name any industry, steel, plastics, petroleum, consumer durables. The top manufacturers in the world were American companies. And in the previous decade, we had the greatest wealth building decade in the history of mankind. The 1950s, America really emerged. In that year, I'll take you back. The United States government spent $126.8 billion, and we had a $5 billion surplus. But during the prior decade, not only had we rebuilt Europe after World War II and rebuilt Japan, but we also built the U.S. federal highway system from scratch. And we didn't, the government wasn't putting up little green signs everywhere taking credit for it, which also in the years that followed, the government got bigger and bigger and bigger. By 1980, oh, incidentally, back in 1960, you could start your first job and expect to work at that company your whole career if you wanted to, and you had medical benefits, and in most cases you worked for a pension. Now that's what happens when the government gets big. We don't have any of the top banks in the world right now. Not one of the top 10 is an American bank. Not one of the top 3 is an American auto company. And as the government has gotten bigger and bigger, bigger, it's 29 times larger today than it was in 1960. You've seen what's happened. By 1980, when President Reagan was running, the entire Northeast was now known as the Rust Belt, where there were factories in Erie, in Flint, in Detroit, in Columbus, in Staten Island. And that's what big government does to America. It is actually toxic. I'll give you another case study. Here in New Hampshire, I live in Hollis, very near the Massachusetts line. Massachusetts has a 6.25% income tax, and New Hampshire, of course, doesn't have an income tax. The businesses on the New Hampshire side are killing the Massachusetts competitors, particularly if they're selling commodities. There's a little shop near where I live that does $200,000 a week in cigarettes. And this is just unbelievable. It's a little hole in the wall, $5 million a year, and the parking lot is full of Massachusetts license plates. So, how do we get a handle on this? The government today is 4.25 times bigger than it was when President Reagan was elected, and it essentially does the same tasks. There's no reason in the world why this government should have had to grow that big. Part of it starts at the top. And I'm going to give you an example from business. There's a notorious fellow by the name of Dennis Kozlowski, who used to be the head of Tyco. Dennis Kozlowski threw $1 million birthday party in Corsica for his wife, paid for it with his shareholders' money. He's now in prison, which is where he should be. But when you send that message to your tens of thousands of employees that it's only the shareholders' money, what the heck? You can bet that those tens of thousands of Tyco employees were not worried about saving paper clips anymore. And so waste at the top becomes a force multiplier throughout the government. And so it's the same thing with the White House and the same thing with the Congress. If the president wastes money, and right now Dick Morris, who used to work for Bill Clinton and would be in a position to know, said in order to replicate the president's lifestyle, you'd have to have an annual income of $50 million a year. $500,000 for a date night and go see a Broadway play? What the heck? It's only the taxpayers' money. Hey, should we upgrade the Congress's private aircraft? What the heck are they doing with private aircraft anyway? But they recently bought themselves $550 million for new private aircraft. In the middle of the worst recession in 80 years? I'm offended by that. Then they voted themselves a $93,000 increase in each of their petty cash funds. Now, for those of you who don't have business backgrounds, petty cash is just too trivial to keep track of. We can't find any general ledger line where we do this. And $93,000 per congressman is over $40 million of our money. In the middle of the worst recession, that is a sense of entitlement that knows no bounds. So I was very pleased to hear Obed make the remark on term limits, because I feel exactly the same way. You know, and I'm going to take this pledge. In fact, I've been, for the last 8 weeks, I've been traveling around New Hampshire and saying it, and maybe Kelly and Sean will join us. I don't think we need any more career politicians in Washington. That's a big part of the problem with this country. We don't need any. We don't need people who want to go to Washington and become career politicians. What we need is people who are going to go down to Washington to straighten out this government. We're going to get spending under control, and we're not going to tolerate corruption. There are criminals heading congressional committees right now. Charles Rangel has not paid his taxes in 10 years. He's hidden income for 10 years. And the rest of the House can't even censure him. You know, how do you do that? And John Murtha's been siphoning off money for over a decade. He's the second-ranking Democrat to build a $150 million private airfield in his hometown. It's an airfield for one. How does the rest of the 435 members of the House put up with this? You know, our founding fathers set a terrific example for us. First of all, when they wrote legislation that wasn't 1,018 pages and bigger than the Old Testament of the Bible, the entire Constitution of the United States is 15 pages. And that's the 7 articles that define how the government will be run, plus the Bill of Rights, which define the 5 freedoms. Okay? They were brief, they were brilliant, and they were patriots. They were men of accomplishment before, and I don't mean to say men, but in this case they were. But if it were today, there would be men and women of accomplishment. They were men of accomplishment who had done a number of things before they went to Philadelphia or to Washington to represent us. And they were public servants. And that's something that we just don't have anymore. We need people to go to Washington who are not going down there to enrich themselves. We need people that are going to go down there and straighten out problems. The last line of the Declaration of Independence set a standard for public servants, which has rarely been equaled. And it said, we pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Can you even imagine people in Congress today having the audacity to say those words? But that's what we need. These men risk, by signing that Declaration of Independence, the 56 men who signed it, 3 of them were from here in New Hampshire, instantly made themselves enemies of the most powerful man on earth, King George, and the most powerful country on earth. And they put themselves at great risk, and they put their countrymen above themselves. And that's what we need. That's what we need in our Congress. We need people who are going to go down there and solve problems, who understand the severity of the problem, and it starts at the top. We're going to ask the government to make cuts. It has to start with the Congress. We got to shrink the size of every congressional office. They don't need to be that big. A lot of the employees in these congressional offices are there simply to help that congressman get reelected.